Welcome to the Litigation Psychology Podcast, brought to you by Courtroom Sciences. I'm Dr. Steve Wood. Got a fantastic topic for you today. It's a topic that I didn't really know a lot about until recently, until I gave a speech in San Francisco, and I met these two fine people who are our guests today. I thought, once I learned a lot from them as far as additional information that I didn't know on a topic, that topic being the gig economy. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today, but first thing I want to do is introduce our guests. We got Jacqueline Altman. Jackie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. And then we got Jason Goodnight. Jason, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good. I appreciate having both of you on because, like I said, when we talked at the conference, I got a lot of good information from you, and like I said, I wanted to bring you on and talk more about it. But I think I just want to pause here because I don't know how many people really know much about the gig economy, about what exactly is in the gig economy. So, Jack, can you just talk a little bit about, just generally speaking, what is the gig economy?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's kind of a term of art that's come about in the last few years that trying to think, I hadn't even heard of it before that. And it's a lot of different technology companies, different groups that do a lot of different things, whether it's transportation, whether it's deliveries, whether it's kind of catering to the individual. A lot of these more personal type companies that allow kind of connect consumers to people who have a service, who have a product. And it encompasses a lot. Honestly.
Yeah, I was surprised at how much it was. I mean, Jason, like when you think about it, you think, certain kind of transportation companies and stuff, but I mean, the gig economy is huge, right? I mean, it's not just a couple one-offs.
And it's really unusual because it allows everyone to be a part-time worker if they so choose on their own terms. You don't have to be at McDonald's from 7 to 8 or 9 to 5, or you can log on and do 2 or 3 hours of work and make a little bit extra money for your rent or for a kid's birthday party, etc. So it does provide a really good benefit, to people who do want to be an independent contractor for these apps.
I think I actually, it says here, I saw a stat that where basically gig economy generates 204 billion, and basically the United States predicted to have more gig workers than non-gig workers by 2027. That's pretty wild.
Wow.
So I want to talk a little bit about more too. Like, how did you guys kind of get your, just how you got involved, not necessarily with the gig economy, but more or less just kind of, your background in law, how you got into law and how you kind of made your way to where you are now. So Jason, we'll start with you on that.
As usual, no big plan, as most 23-year-old guys have. I graduated with a history degree from Arkansas back in 98, and quickly realized there was not a big demand for people with history degrees from a college in Arkansas. So I'll go to law school. And 3 years passed, and got to do something. So I went to the firm I am now, straight out of law school, and been there, I guess, 22 years now. And again, it's in law school, they teach you how to think about law, but not so much how to practice law. And ended up with some really good mentors, Joe Farris, John Woodard in my firm. And they taught me how to do trucking originally. And that's how I eventually kind of merged from trucking to this sort of work as well.
Yeah,
but no amazing. Great plan.
Yeah. What about hey, I mean, we all end up some spot, right? We don't where we start and where we end. How about you, Jack? What's your pathway to where you're at now?
I mean, I think it was very cliche. I was 12 years old watching Law and Order and thought this is what I want to do. And so I want to be a prosecutor. But then when I went to college, I got a chemistry degree. I didn't really think there was any crossover, still planned on going to law school. And when I was in law school, I had wonderful mentors who said, there's actually a whole niche market. There's patent litigation. There are things you can do with your degree. And so I ended up doing patent litigation for a few years. And my husband was in the Navy, so we got transferred around, and we both went to Baylor here in Waco, and our plan was to move back. So we came here, and I am at a wonderful firm that I have amazing mentors who taught me how to go from the realm of patent litigation to trucking litigation and transportation, and something I had never done before. And so sort of a happy accident as to how I ended up here specifically. But yeah, I've gotten to do a wide variety of things, which has been really, really interesting.
Yeah, I guess the question on that from that patent litigation experience, I mean, obviously we've done a lot, some patent work, and there's a big difference between how to prepare a patent case, how to work up a patent case, how to present a patent case to a jury versus probably how you would do something in the gig economy or transportation, right?
Yeah, I do think there is some overlap because some of the gig economy litigation issues actually do have to do with certain app-based platforms, some technology. And so I think having some of that background and trying to learn how to portray that to jurors who may not necessarily know much about it and speak about it in a common sense way. So I do think it helped a little bit. But yeah, patent litigation is kind of its own realm of litigation.
Yeah. Yeah, Jason, I think another thing too, you talk about some oil and gas and transportation. Once again, I mean, trucking transportation versus other transportations, probably any similarities, overlaps, any differences that you notice as far as just how you would present it?
I think it's more in transportation, of course, the risks are so high. Every accident is potentially $1 million accident. And given the public-facing nature of some of these apps, these gig economy providers, they are targets. And knowing how to prepare a case, like in the trucking world or the oil and gas world, where it's always a potential something bigger case, no matter how small it is, it's easy to transition that on to the app space as well, where I'm showing my bias as a defense lawyer here, but when people see a big brand name on the accident report, obviously, in the plaintiff's mind at least, the case value goes up because there's more money there. And we have to prepare, and Jacq does the same thing. This is not a rear-end car wreck where a defendant is insured by the lowest advertising paid by the month insurance company. These are big companies, publicly traded, who have big exposure and PR exposure as well. So we almost have to treat a simple rear end accident like it would a transportation accident because of the risk.
That's interesting. I mean, have you noticed a lot of, you don't need to name names or any of that type of stuff, but I mean, do you see a lot of similar plaintiff attorneys that you see on transportation cases, or is there more of a niche that you've seen at least from the plaintiff's perspective on these type of people who are dealing more with this kind of gig economy type stuff?
If you land at LAX and go to the rideshare pickup area, you'll see 12 or 15 billboards.
I've seen those actually.
On a Lyft or Uber or whatever the local rideshare company is. The plaintiff bar has figured out that there is a large insurance policy and large assets out there. So you're seeing that specialized market where the same people who used to be advertising, I was hit by an 18-wheeler, now were you hit in an Uber? And of course, the next question is, a lot of times police reports just list the driver. It's that next interview question, what were you doing? And then it goes into detail on that. But Jacq, I'm treating her well down in Texas, especially Dallas and Houston. The plaintiff bar is going after them.
Yeah, Jacq, have you seen those?
We've seen a lot of the same overlap, and it's exactly what Jason was saying. The billboards that have the 18-wheelers, if you were hit by an 18-wheeler, that it's the exact same firms, and they're just kind of transitioning it over to a new company and almost handling those cases the same because, as Jason said, they're looking for the cases where they can cash in on the big insurance policies. It's not so much about the facts of the accident as much as who else can we pull in for the litigation.
That's interesting. I think though, when you're talking about there's kind of corollaries between certain, plaintiffs firms that will just take it from trucking and move it over to the gig economy space. But have you guys noticed in your work as far as any sort of differences in how, like you said, legal precedent or any of that type of stuff? Because I know that it seems as how it's more in its infancy as far as that goes. I mean, do you find it more difficult as far as, and Jacq, you can speak to this because I know some of the information is that, are you seeing different legal challenges or legal hurdles that you have to go up against that you wouldn't necessarily do maybe in transportation?
I do think it's different because I don't think the law is as well settled, and I don't think the legislature has caught up with the gig economy in most places. There are some TNC regulations in some states, and they are varying levels of, just a cursory legislation that was put out versus ones that have been revised and thought through. But I know in the trucking industry, there are a lot of regulations that we've all become familiar with, a lot of precedent, a lot of case laws for filing certain summary judgment motions that we have all become familiar with. That is not necessarily true with the gig economy space, partly because of the way that people are employed, whether it's an independent contractor and employer relationship, and just kind of how all these regulations work together. And so that is a new space that's still evolving.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. Go ahead, Jason. Have you had anything in your experience that you've seen?
Yeah, I'd agree with Jack 100% on that. In trucking, the DOT, FMCSR govern everything. There is a rule for how big your fire extinguisher should be, how big your mud flap should be, how many hours can you drive, how many times can you take a break. In the TNC, the transportation network companies, that doesn't exist. A driver can drive as long per day as he or she feels safe to drive. The other issue is the background checks. The background checks to be a trucker or drug test, medical card. You got to go see a doctor. You have to check your last 3 employees. And it's all spelled out by federal law. For the TNC companies, again, like Jack said, there is no law on this. So a lot of times you're seeing the plaintiff bar especially, try to analogize this to a trucking case. Well, you shouldn't drive more than 10 hours a day, or you shouldn't drive more than 12 hours a day without a break. And well, if it's good enough for a trucker, shouldn't that be good enough for a transportation network carrier who's picking you up from a bar? As of right now, the states and feds do not agree with that. Now, of course, some people think they should have those same requirements. The other issue is one of the, without getting too much in the weeds, is the employment relationship. Most truck drivers you see are either independent contractors or an employee of the truck company. A lot of litigation in these app and gig economies are attempts by the plaintiff bar to categorize these drivers as employees. I know, Jack, you've seen a lot down now in Texas on that issue. Simple things like, you were driving for X company. No, I was not driving for X company. Without getting too much in the weeds, there are certain things that Jack and we really work with the drivers to create that good legal record and the correct legal record. How they are actually categorized by the U.S. Department of Labor, rather than a sloppy answer that can be construed. So there is no DOT authority in the app space.
Yeah, and I think
because as you said, like the federal regulations cover that for trucking. And so independent contractor, employee, you're a statutory employee. We all understand where that's going. That's not clear in the gig economy space.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like you said, I didn't even think about it too, where, you might talk to someone and you're a driver or something. And like you said, they talk about how they've been driving 10, 12 hours or how they do it, most of the day. And yeah, I think it's interesting though, like you said, what you bring up as far as the differences between transportation though. And I think we talk a lot on the podcast about, documentation and, the whole idea of having these safety manuals and stuff like that. I mean, is that another thing too? That's a difference in the gig economy as far as now your truck driver is in an accident, right? And then the plaintiff counsel comes in and asks to see all the training manuals and the safety handbooks. I mean, do these type of gig economy things have these safety manuals, handbooks, and all those types of things? I mean, I don't want to give away the special sauce. I mean, but you know what I'm saying, as far as thinking about the language that's in those type of documents and whether or not opposing counsel is going to be able to use those.
Well, I think it's interesting because a lot of those deal with in the trucking industry. It's because you need to get a commercial driver's license to drive that truck. There's a lot of special requirements. If anyone off the street were to get into that truck, they wouldn't know exactly how to drive it. They wouldn't know that, when you're making a right turn, how the off tracking of the trailer go. There's a lot of specialized training. For a lot of these gig economy, you're doing what you or I would do every day. You are just saying, hey, I'll provide this service to someone else and get paid to do it. But you and I drive around, we pick up food, we, whatever any of those services are. and all you need is your driver's license or common sense. And so in some ways, it's kind of funny to hold somebody to say, oh, you would need a safety manual to drive your car or to deliver food, when you wouldn't have to do that outside of that space, just as a normal person doing that every day.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is interesting. And I think when we talk about, documentation and opposing counsel and stuff, obviously then we get to the preparing of the witnesses for deposition. Jason, I think this is where I'll let you weigh in a little bit, as far as, I think the corporate representatives, the individuals that are in this gig economy space, are probably going to be more between, the 30s, early 40s and that type of stuff. I mean, in your experience, as far as getting witnesses ready for deposition, do you notice a difference of how you have to handle more of this gig economy corporate representative versus the other type of oil and gas?
Yeah, a couple of issues on it is, one is the app economy generates a massive amount of data, just reams and gigabytes of data. Everyone's read the horror stories. My phone's tracking me. I said something and I got an Instagram ad 30 minutes later on that.
That happened to me just the other day, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things we really before even the prep is really working on narrowing the scope of any 30B6 or deposition requests, and fighting the battles early and keeping the data out of the case. Because again, some of these independent operators, they may be driving for 3 different companies. They could be driving DoorDash, they could be driving Instacart, they could be driving Postmates or whomever, because they are free to do that. So we really want to, before we get to that stage, even prepping the corporate rep, is making sure the corporate rep is not going to be talking about too much stuff. Not going over reams of data. Well, this driver did X, Y, and Z, again, like Jacq was saying 2 weeks ago. The individuals, a lot of these people are new. These companies did not exist 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Or if they did, they only existed in San Francisco, New York, Miami. And now all of a sudden they're making deliveries in Pecos, Texas. They're making deliveries in Watonga, Oklahoma, or Bugscuffle, Arkansas. Companies, places where, what's going on here. So you've got corporate reps who are new companies. So there's not a big history. It's not where AT&T, which has been around for 100 years, where we know these questions are coming. Second, as Jacq said earlier, there is no law. Now, the plaintiff bar is trying to create standards, but we're really a lot of times focusing on not giving a reason to create a standard that does not exist. For example, wouldn't you agree with me that it's not safe for, quote, your driver, I'm using that in quote because that's obviously a red flag, to be driving 10 hours? We don't want to make those because it could be safe, because what does driving mean? Are they sitting in the airport parking lot reading a book, waiting for their ride? It's not like a trucker who is, I'm going to drive from Phoenix to Albuquerque today and be on the road. So really using those corporate reps to be proactive and focus on, how this is, like Jacq said, this is driving a car. This is like me taking you to the airport, like I would if you and I were going to a football game, versus I'm getting paid for it. The second issue is these guys, women do move around a lot. These companies start, sometimes they fail, a new venture capital comes in and we're going to move over there. So it is important to really get them briefed on, hey, this is what we're doing in Oklahoma. They're not going to push hard on the employer-employee relationship, whereas California is much more keyed up on, are you an employee for wage issues, et cetera. Because one last thing Jacq and I want to do is have a case in rural Texas or rural Oklahoma, create bad law or bad testimony that can be used in California, where that could cost the app company a lot more money.
That's interesting. I mean, Jacq, have you noticed the same type of thing, in getting your corporate reps ready and talking to them as far as getting them prepared for depositions?
Yeah. And just like Jason said, it's, you're considering different laws in different jurisdictions that may be places you're not as familiar with. I mean, I am technically licensed in California. I don't really practice there. And to have to understand the employment laws there and how they differ from Texas, because I could have a corporate rep in Texas who gives great testimony for Texas, right? But that deposition can be used against a different corporate rep in California to say, no, you said under oath this about the person who drove for you. And it can create a whole issue that you didn't anticipate. And so understanding how all of these jurisdictions work together, all of these regulations work together, and have to have all those considerations is challenging. And it's something you have to keep in mind when prepping people, that there's not a uniform body of law, and we don't want to accidentally create a problem somewhere else or create a reason to create bad law somewhere.
Yeah, I think, you talk about challenges and stuff too, go back. I mean, have you noticed that the corporate reps, as I said, are more like 40 somethings who are probably not necessarily as seasoned as others and kind of in this business, as Jason said, with it being more new and up and coming. So they haven't had a lot of experience with the litigation field. They haven't had a lot of experience just really in general about, life. And so does you find that it makes it more difficult to prep them for deposition?
In some sense, yes, mostly in terms of the fact that there's usually less experience. We're not dealing with somebody who has been at a company for a decade or so, and a company that has an established history that we can look back on. So like Jason said, AT&T, even if you have a new corporate rep, we can still look back and we can say, hey, this is the history of AT&T. These are all the things you can learn. A lot of these gig economy companies, these are startups. There are still new ones coming on the market, and even the older ones are relatively new. And so even if you have people who have been around for a while, that your company just hasn't been in existence. And most of the corporate reps are relatively young, and there's just not as much information to prepare someone on because it hasn't existed as long.
Yeah. And Jason, when you talk about startup and you're talking about corporate representatives and making decisions, I mean, really for you, what are you looking at as far as, if you were to get asked recommendations from your clients, or if you had any thoughts as far as what they should be looking at for corporate reps? I mean, is it always the person who's the most knowledgeable, or is it other aspects that you're looking at in order to find your reps?
Good question, and a tough one to answer. As a preliminary matter, everyone that I've worked with these companies is ridiculously smart. I mean, these ladies and guys, they are crazy smart. They're all from Stanford and Harvard and have these incredible science backgrounds. And, like I said, I'm just a dumb kid from Arkansas, the history degree. These folks are all a lot smarter than I am. And, what Jacq and I really have to do is teach them to communicate and to a juror, again, in rural Arkansas or rural Texas or rural Kansas or rural Colorado, who can understand the difference between there is no such thing as a, quote, Uber driver or a Lyft driver or an Instacart driver. That doesn't exist. Now, if the plaintiff will want to say words like that, I just pick those three names at random, but it goes for anything because they're not employees. Being able to explain, what the company is, especially with an older jury. My mother would never go order groceries. That's what she does for fun. She goes grocery shopping. It fills 2 hours of her day. So you have to tell a jury, because juries are normally a bit older, hey, what's this button on my phone do? They really have to explain, in my opinion, what the service does, and two, the benefits of the service. In the transportation sector, Jacq and I practice in, we always talk about, well, do you like toilet paper that costs 50 cents a roll, or do you want it to cost $5 a roll? Because if you want it to cost $5 a roll, we can take trucks off the road. If you want it to cost 50 cents a roll, you're going to share the road with trucks. And that's a choice the economy and society has made. And the same way with these apps. Do you want, as a jury, every driver to go through a background search and they can only drive for one company and be monitored? Or do you want the single mom who wants to be able to pick up another 3 hours of work and make $75 to pay for a kid's birthday party. Do you want to take that opportunity away from her? So talking about the values that these companies bring to the consumer and the independent app user, I think is an important part, because a lot of people just don't get the value these companies do. We all do. We're a little bit younger and we use them. You would get that it's, if I'm in New York, I can take a rideshare company better than I can rent a car. But we're all a little bit younger, and the juries skew a little bit older. So that's one thing I like my corporate rep to really talk about, is that we already benefit to society, both to the independent users and the customers.
Interesting. I mean, Jackie, is that kind of your approach too? I mean, I know one of the big things everyone talks about is kind of humanizing the corporation and, humanizing the defendant and stuff. And I think that's goes to the heart of that, right? What Jason was saying.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's explaining the benefit to, especially to a generation that didn't grow up with it. Because to me, I see this as so valuable as a mother who has young kids, to be able to outsource some of the things that I do to somebody else. A, it provides me the time, and B, it provides somebody else income that they may not have been able to do. I have a lot of friends with young kids who, hey, this is a great way that I can pick up things part-time and I can supplement my income. That's very good for them. And I think explaining, honestly, kind of from a capitalistic approach of, let's let the market do that if that's a service people want. And I think that's relatable. I think the second aspect is also humanizing the company, in terms of the company wants this to be successful and wants this to be good. I think a lot of people forget, you demonize corporations as saying, oh, they're out there just for profit. But the thing is, a corporation is not going to last in the long term if they're doing things unsafely, if they're not having good practices. And I think having a corporate rep who can really talk about that and say, look, there's the reason why we do a certain level of background checks or safety requirements that we have for the people who pick up some of these jobs, make sense, because we want our company to provide a good quality, safe service to people. That being said, we're not able to do the level of detail that you would if you were hiring an employee, because then, as Jason said, that toilet paper is going to cost $10 a roll if we have to go through that. And so it's having someone who can explain that in a way that makes sense, but shows that the corporation is really trying. It's for the consumer. It's for the jurors.
Yeah, and I think another thing too is, go ahead, Jason.
And Jack's absolutely right. Without getting too much in the weeds, there are safety checks, there are driver background checks. We're not implying that that's not done. It's just a different system than the feds mandate through the DOT system. Again, like Jacq was saying, it's really showing the jury there is a balance. And again, the companies want to make sure that there's work available, or these gigs are available to people.
We keep talking about,
no one wants to be a gig driver if they're going to go through a DOT drug test and everyone's a pass-free. Employers are contacted. That defeats the purpose of being a gig economy employee.
Right. And that goes back to, like you said, the whole idea of the gig economy, right, is just for people to be able to pick up things here and there and pick and choose when they want to work, pick and choose when they don't want to work, and that type of stuff, versus going through the process of, having to go through the very intensive process of being able to come on, or onboarding of certain, companies. I think another thing too, when we talk about gig economy, which we haven't really touched on much, really is it's not just necessarily these ride shares that we've kind of talked about, but I mean, there's other things too, right? I mean, the gig economy really is like, if you're talking about Airbnbs, or if you're talking about all these other things, that's considered the gig economy, right? You're just picking up freelance jobs. That's the gig economy, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's down to like walking dogs. When I lived in San Diego, we had this great company, and it was local, but they've now branched out into national companies. And it's just someone, I can pick up my app. I can say, hey, my dog, I need to have someone come and check on my dog 2 times a day while I'm at work. They'll just come by. They'll do that. That's an amazing service. That is so helpful to me, and something I never would have thought of a few years back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bought a bookcase last week, and there was a little TaskRabbit.com will assemble this for me for X dollars, instead of me flipping around with the Allen wrenches and banging my knuckles. And after about an hour trying to build it, I considered calling TaskRabbit or getting in the app to have it done correctly. But yeah, Jack's right. It's the beauty of this, and the beauty of it without being federally regulated to the degree that trucking is that the consumer and the companies and the gig workers can be creative. You know what? I can hang a picture better than anybody else. I can get on TaskRabbit or something else and market myself with that. Etsy's the same way. You know what? I can make a great candle, and I can go through this process. So what's really done is, the lack of the super strict regulation like in trucking has allowed these companies to flourish and employ's not the right word, contract with workers, gig workers for services they normally couldn't sell.
I think the other important thing that, I think about when you're talking about this kind of creativity and the ability to not have a lot of regulations, but I think it goes back to when we talk as well about it, there's that the gig economy has the luxury to learn from the mistakes of other industries, right? As far as making sure that they see what happens as far as nuclear verdicts, they see what happens as far as where the pain points are, and they can hopefully learn from where those are and kind of preemptively protect themselves, right, Jackie, from having those type of nuclear verdicts or seeing where people are getting in trouble.
Yeah, it's definitely something that they can consider. And even though the law is not clear in that space and it's still developing, you can take what has happened in some of the other spaces and say, okay, this is a way that maybe we can preempt those types of regulations because we are going to kind of internally police ourselves this way. And that way, the issue that we've noticed in another space won't come up here.
Yeah, and like I said, I think Jason, are you seeing the same type of thing, or are you having those conversations as far as like, hey, we can get ahead of the curve as far as, getting our defenses up already before anything happens to make sure that we're well prepared for any sort of potential litigation. Because I think sometimes when people are writing up rules and regulations, I think sometimes it's more or less what feels good versus what's going to look good, or what's going to happen when it gets shown to you in trial.
Yeah, and without getting too much detail, data is king. Data is powerful, and these gig economy companies have data that no one else has. When I go to Walmart to buy paper towels and toilet paper, Walmart may be tracking my credit card, but they're not getting real-time information that Jason just got picked up at this location, which is also maybe a little bit crime-ridden. Extra care should be given. Do we need to be, there's going to be a concert going on. So we need to, there's a lot of data they have that other companies wish they had, to be honest with you. And I think the good companies are using that to be proactive. We keep talking transportation because that's what Jacq and I do is, if an accident happens, everyone knows can know within a very short amount of time because the rider can report it. It's not a regular accident. Well, the Lowe's guy backed over my sprinkler system and I have to call Lowe's. It's not that delay. So on bad accidents, a great response, a proactive investigation can be set up within seconds versus we have to wait till the accident report comes in like the old days. I think there is some value in having all the data, and the smart companies are using it to get ahead of the game.
Yeah, very good. That's kind of what we want, right? That's why we're doing the podcast. That's why I brought you on the podcast anyway, is just to make sure that we can get out ahead of it and kind of use this information so people can learn to defend themselves and be proactive, prior to litigation. I'm going to wrap this up, though. We'll let you guys go here. I appreciate it. I mean, I'd like to talk with you all day long. I mean, it was good catching up with you, though, from after seeing you at the conference. But close this out. Jackie, hey, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
You can go to our website at Naman Howell Smith and Lee. I am in Waco. It should have my email, phone number. You can get in touch with me that way. And I will answer email or phone call anytime of day.
Yeah. LinkedIn, Twitter handles. Are you on any of that social media?
I am on LinkedIn, not Twitter, but LinkedIn, Facebook. Yep.
What about you, Jason? How can anybody get a hold of you? They want to talk to you.
Yeah, about the same. Fraden and Farris in Tulsa. The TulsaLawyer.com is our domain that luckily we bought 25 years ago. Google Fraden Farris or hit TulsaLawyer.com, and you can find my email, phone, my assistant, and all kinds of stuff like that. I'm on LinkedIn, but I have no idea what the search is. I think I have Twitter, but again, no idea.
That's very good. Hey, you going to make any guest appearances on Tulsa King at all?
I don't think I'm quite Stallone worthy yet. That's the problem. I can't get in that good of shape either. He's 75-year-old guy is going to show me up.
I know, right?
That would
Exactly.
be kind of embarrassing.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys coming on. This has been another edition of the Litigation Psychology Podcast brought to you by Courtroom Sciences.